Well, hello everyone again, and welcome to another edition of the Tony Topping Show. I am Tony Topping. It's the 31st of July, 2013. We're doing a pre-record. I'm tired. I did a pre-recording last night with somebody called Stefan, who's had high, strange paranormal experiences. And we had a bit of a bit of a psychic attack going on at 10 to 3 in the morning, which knocked me out for the rest of the day. It was quite brutal. It was very nasty. And it gives reason to realise all the time in terms of UFOs that the Canadian UFO researcher Wilbert Smith, when he approached the American government, Washington in a famous memo, turned around to him and said that there is a mental component to the UFO phenomena, and there certainly is. And our guest in the world of UFOs is no exception. He's a great guy. I've got a shrine to him here because I respect him very much with all his work that he's done. He's brought out a new book which we're going to talk about. He doesn't believe in cattle mutilations, nor does he believe in the Illuminati. So it will be interesting to see his comments on that one. But he's been around in the early days in 1980 when it was UFO magazine in the UK with Graham Birdsall, and I'm pleased to welcome to the show Yorkshire born and bred our kid Philip Mantle. Good evening, Philip.
Good evening, Tony. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, it's all right, matey, and you've certainly got a wide and varied curriculum vitae, should we say. But your interest in UFO research began in 1979, and you are a broadcaster, publicist, lecturer, and broadcaster and researcher of UFOs, and you really are very respected. You did a book with Paul Stonehill as well regarding UFOs over Russia, and you were appointed Director of Investigations for Bufora, and you've probably seen it all, Phil, in your lifetime in doing all this. And you've got you've actually got a new book out, and that's what we're kind of like here to look at. I think you're here to plug yourself silly with your new book, which is written, and that is called Once Upon a Missing Time. And as we talk to Phil, I think this is a good starting point. Phil's going to tell us about the book. Well, actually, I'll tell you a bit about the book, and then perhaps Phil can actually come in. I'm clicking on stuff here in the hub. Let's tell you, the listener, what this book is all about. Once Upon a Missing Time is a novel of alien abduction by Philip Mantle, and it's a powerful and emotional journey involving a married couple called Alan and Pamela Morrison and their teenage daughter Wendy. Alan is a teacher at the local high school, and his wife Pamela is a social worker for the local authority. And one night, whilst driving back from their in-laws' home near the rural North Yorkshire village of East Yardsley, the Morrison family encounters something that would change their lives and worldview forever. The Morrisons have a close encounter with something quite extraordinary. On arriving home, they discover nearly 4 hours of their lives missing. And in the bump you sent me, Phil, I'm wanting more. I'm wanting to hear all about it and what's gone on and all that kind of thing. So, Philip, good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, I mean, this is my my first dip into the fiction writing. The novel is set back in 1990. Mrs. Thatcher has just come out of Downing Street, replaced by John Major. It's pre-internet days. There's no smartphones, no email. A simpler time. Still had cassette recorders and videotapes. And although it's a work of fiction, Tony, back in the 90s, I did a fair bit of research concerning cases of missing time and abduction here in the UK, and I co-authored a book at that time, a non-fiction book about it. And one of the things that we did in that particular book, a little bit, was try and touch on the personal side. Most researchers, when they talk about, the close encounter cases, will just recount what the witnesses described or experienced, so on. But more often than not, the personal side of things, how it affects the individuals, how it affects their home life, their work, their family, their friends, who do they turn to, who turns a blind eye to it, who dismisses it, who accepts it. All that kind of thing is not normally talked about. So I've tried to emphasize that side of things in Once Upon a Missing Time as much as I can. And also, there is a skeptical community out there. They would have us believe that the people who have these close encounters, are all fruitcakes. who live in the middle of nowhere in Nevada or New Mexico or wherever. But in reality, that's not the case. Irrespective of your views on the abduction, the close encounters, in my experience, those that have these encounters are a cross spectrum of Joe Public. You know, it's you or I, a teacher, you know, policeman, a painter and decorator, whatever, you know. So I've tried to emphasize that as well, that whatever the nature and origin of the experience, it can happen to anyone, anywhere. And that's not a scary thing. It's just trying to emphasize that these people are just like you and me. And they're not some, you know, redneck from the wilds of the United States. They're just normal human beings. So that's the thrust of it. You know, I think sometimes, Tony, the close encounter experience is better told in a work of fiction. Cause it can go, it can go into, you know, the emotional side and the personal side. And although it is a work of fiction, I use my experience in talking to people who have had these encounters, and, you know, some of the bits and pieces in there are from real life encounters, as are some of the individuals that are in there. You mentioned in your introduction, I was a great friend of the late Graham Birdsall. Yes. One of the characters in it is you know, loosely based on Graham, not entirely, but
which character's that, Phil?
Well, I'd rather not say, but
oh, come on!
you got to read the book and see if you can figure that out, Tony. Come on.
All right then. All right. I'm interested to know, during the course of writing your book, Phil, if you had any scenario in terms of alien abduction that you come across in all your years of experience that made you have your hair stand on end and reach for the drinks cabinet.
There are a number of cases, Tony, if I'm honest. I mean...
Could you tell the listeners possibly one in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lady by, I'm going to mention this lady by name. It's a lady by the name of Rosalind Reynolds. Rosalind lives down in Lincolnshire. She runs her own business. And this happened to her a number of years ago. It wasn't so much what happened to her, Tony. It was, again, the effect that it had on her. You know, extreme personal effect that it still stays with her to this very day. And one of the things I still keep in contact with Rosalind, and she's credited in the book. So a lot of the emotional content in the book is based on Rosalind herself. So when the manuscript was finished, I asked Rosalind to read it for me and just say, you know, have I got anything wrong here? Is there anything totally stupid? And she gave it, you know, the thumbs up. Also, there was a young man, and I've called him David, and he lived in northwest Wales. I'll try and pronounce it, Pwllheli. And I interviewed him several times. And at the time he was only, you know, 18, 19. And again, it wasn't his experience, it was the effect it had on him, Tony. You know,
yes.
We'd sit and talk about his love of rock music or his girlfriend.
Yes.
And everything was fine. Yes. But when it came to talking about what had happened to him, it frightened the living daylights out of him. Yeah. And it scared him so much that he had nightmares, and he had to have hypnotherapy. Not regressive hypnosis, hypnotherapy to relieve the nightmares.
With the trauma under hypnotherapy, Phil, with the trauma, that, just for the listeners, and then I'll bring you. With hypnotherapy, there's something called, when anybody's traumatized, there's something called an abreaction that goes on when the person's in a relaxed state. Are these abreactions quite common? These sudden shocking reactions when they're deep in subconscious, when they get deeply into the subconscious state. Do these abreactions happen? Does it worsen the matter rather than help the matter, in your opinion?
All I can say with David Thomas is the name we gave him, is that it helped him.
That's good.
And I'll give you an example, Tony. We sat outside where he worked, and I asked him if he could take me to the scene of where the experience took place.
Right.
And he did. I got in the car and I drove, and I've got a photograph of him stood there. Yeah. And he's absolutely frozen rigid.
Good God.
And I didn't realise it at the time. I was just taking a picture there, and I didn't realise it, and he featured him in my first book called Without Consent. And I sent David a copy of it, and he thanked me for it, but he didn't read it for 5 years. He didn't want to go back there again. It scared him so much. I mean, 5 years later, he'd grown up. He'd even got his own family.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
He didn't read it for 5 years. So, you know, I've tried to emphasise this in the fictional book in Once Upon a Missing Time. You know, the effect it can have on people, and you know that. You know, hopefully I've managed to do that.
Yeah. Well, this is. I mean, the cover of it is a striking stuff. The cover has got an alien on the cover, and as I was saying earlier, the skin tone and texture of what it looks like is very, very accurate. The face is quite accurate. The neck area might not be, but the facial area on the book cover is pretty spot on. And the skin tone is just, you know. And what happens is, Phil, is that wanders into the subconscious. So it's quite a shocker. People have to realise that they're not physically in the bloody room sometimes, or physically near you. They're in the subconscious. They seem to be activating into the subconscious area. Did you have any UFO sightings yourself then? How did you get into this? Because the majority of researchers I speak to, it's because something happened to them. What made you get into Graham Birdsell and all this kind of thing then, the UFO thing?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Tony, I've always had an interest in all things paranormal, for want of a better word, since I was a kid. Right. I mean, as far back as I can remember. I mean, you know, I was one of the kids at school who would stick his hand up and ask the daft questions, you know. I went to the spiritualist church with my friend's grandma when I was, you know, not but a lad. And so I was always interested in that kind of thing. And it just seemed to flow into the UFO subject, and you know, and I saw a little ad in a local newspaper here. I used to live just outside of Leeds, and it was for a UFO group meeting, and I thought, that sounds interesting. So, you know, off I went, and it was the first ever meeting of the Yorkshire UFO Society, which was founded by Graham and Mark Birdsell. Yeah. So Graham's no longer with us, and that's how, you know, it really grabbed me. I never wanted to listen to other people's answers, Tony. I always wanted to find out for myself. You know, I wanted to know. I'm one of these, you know, if there's a button that says don't press, I want to press it to see what it does. And that's how I got interested. And again, of course, in those days, there was, you know, no internet. You had to read or attend lectures or meetings to find anything out. And I just consumed whatever information I could lay my hands on, and as the years went by, I got more and more involved, and you know, here I am today. I don't know how many years later. A lot of years later.
Yeah, no. Is your book a heavy read then, Phil? Is it heavy going, or is it a light read?
I think it goes up and down, Tony. I think, you know, there's a few comical parts in it. Right. You know. I mean, it's Yorkshire Day tomorrow, and there's been things in the TV here about, you know, Yorkshire humour. There's a bit of that in. But there are some scary parts in it as well. I haven't pulled any punches. I mean, I've already had a few comments on social networking sites, just as you mentioned on the cover. You know, saying, I don't want to read that.
Yeah. The interesting thing is the testimonial from Rosalind, who indicates that she found it a lovely read. I'm interested to know, Phil, in your perception, what makes the book for somebody like Rosalind, who's had these close encounter witnesses, a lovely read? What is the quality that makes it a lovely read compared to yet another heavy-going book about alien encounters? Sell yourself, Phil!
Well, again, you know, I think I've painted the witnesses, or the experiences, or the abductees, whatever you want to call them, in a very positive light. Right. You know, I've shown them to be, you know, ordinary, hard-working, intelligent individuals who encounter something totally bizarre, totally out of the blue, that they weren't interested in, they had no knowledge of, and how it affects them, and how they try and deal with it, and how they try and cope.
Yes.
And there's some media involved as well. There's some newspapers involved. Now, you know, from Rosalind's point of view, she only ever spoke to the media once, and it was a very unpleasant exercise. So she was happy to see that kind of thing in it as well. So from her point of view, as someone who's had this experience, this encounter, you know, the positive slant on it for her was made it a lovely read, and it reads to her. This is what she revealed to me in sort of private conversation, as authentic.
It says here,
as the genuine article rather than somebody making a story up.
Yes.
And, I ran several things by her and I'm very grateful for her assistance.
It's all very good, isn't it? It says here that it was without mocking or patronising those who have had experiences, because the mainstream media will mock and patronise. I had a film crew about 3 weeks ago here, and I got very shirty with them. We were losing each other's temper. It was the first time ever, Phil, that I started getting shirty with a film crew, because it was just going down this mainstream tabloid for the masses piss-taking that I objected to. But you've seen all this, haven't you? Your name isn't quite in lights. You've done it all. You've been on This Morning. You've done the media. What's your take on why the mainstream media is taking the piss? Or are they taking the piss when they see a book like yours? What's been the reception of the mainstream media regarding your book?
At the moment, it's a bit early to say, but regarding the encounters themselves, I think it's an easy target, Tony.
Right.
It's a cheap shot. It's easily done, and you know yourself. If you go to a conference, in our subject, there are some people who we would call eccentrics.
Right. Yes.
Oh
yeah.
But having said that, you go to a meeting about steam trains or stamp collecting or whatever. You will still find the same ratio of so-called eccentrics.
Yes.
But the media, for some reason, will find that one in the audience and pick them out.
Yes.
And they do it time after time. That's largely why I've stopped bothering with them, Tony, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't earn my living from them, and I've got shirty with them before I've even met them.
Have you really? Just the listeners, out of interest, just tell the listeners, Phil, one of the incidents where you may have got shirty, to give the reference, because you're a professional researcher, you know your stuff. Why did you get shirty with the media?
You can just sometimes when you know it yourself, Tony, when you're talking to them, that you're going. If you cooperate with them, you're asking for trouble.
Right.
You know they've got an agenda already there. They know they're not going to take it seriously. So okay, they're going to pay you, but for me, they can stick their money where the sun don't shine. I'm not bothered anymore. I've no desire ever to see my ugly face on television ever again if I don't have to. If it happens, it happens. But I'm not reliant on them. They are reliant on us. And I've made it personally that they have to play my game, not the other way around. If they don't like what I'm saying, they don't like what information I'm about to partake, then don't bother me.
Yeah,
I couldn't care less.
Yeah.
Go away. If you want somebody who's experienced, like you say, has probably seen it all or most of it and knows what they're talking about, then let's talk. If you don't, then I'll see you later. Yeah,
that's absolutely. I know I've done this well. What is interesting is one of the reviews indicates about your book, Phil, that Philip Mantle is probably one of the major unsung heroes of the British UFO scene. You're actually involved with another project as well, which I'd like to go into, to do with your magazine. I'll go into that later if you don't mind. I take it that's still going. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Great stuff. Well, what I'm interested to know is that it says in one of the reviews that you tackled the thorny subject of the abduction and close encounter scenario. In your professional opinion, what do you think is the difference between an alien abduction and a close encounter?
Well, a close encounter is a broad range of types of experiences. Right. And I sometimes remind the media that the phrase close encounter wasn't invented by Steven Spielberg. It was invented by a UFO researcher, Dr. Alan Hynek, and it's a category system. And even now, there's still certain places where they argue over what is a close encounter of this kind or that kind. So a close encounter is a broad spectrum and can cover a number of things. But the real nitty gritty of it is the alien abduction. I think that, if you call it an alien abduction, then we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of a specific experience or type of experiences that it refers to. So it just depends on your own phraseology, Tony, whichever you prefer to use. But call it what you will. Different people call it different things.
The thing is with it, there's an interesting statement here from somebody else who's been reading your book, Phil. The book is called Once Upon a Missing Time. Plug. And it's interesting. The remarks that are coming out are very interesting, because I was doing some research about all this, and I've written down here that this is quite profound. They say time is a great healer, and it is, until it goes missing. Mantle's novel takes us on a dark tour through the often misguided, understood abduction phenomena. Now, in terms of your research, Phil, can we explore the missing time scenario? Just tell the listeners what it's all about and what you think it's about, and from the point of view of your research, and how it's relevant to the book as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, a missing time, I mean, the term missing time, I think, really was popularised by the late Bud Hopkins in the United States, abduction researcher, and that was the title of his first book. And, you know, a basic scenario is that someone will be driving home, you know, see something unusual in the sky or close by, at close proximity. They will know roughly what time it is. They might have the radio on, or, you know, they look at their watch, or they know roughly how long it takes to get home. And then, bang, the next thing they know, they're home. No idea what's happened in between. And, you know, the 20-minute drive home has taken an hour. And what's happened? Now, you know, hence missing time. Probably first came to ufology back to the individual. They can remember it. However, you know, they remember what's happened. There are others that, you know, have an itch that they have to scratch. They can remember nothing about this period of missing time. And on occasion, regressive hypnosis is being used to put them in a relaxed state and try and go back in time, if you like, in their mind, and relive or recount what's happened. And there are many well-known instances of that happening. And so that's the missing time scenario. And I've spoken to lots of people who have encountered that. Some, you know, wanted to explore it further. Others didn't.
I mean, do you subscribe to the Susan Blakemore, Chris French kind of thing, that it's all to do with brain epilepsy, temporal lobe epilepsy?
The only problem with you know, any kind of explanation of that nature, now I've met Susan Blackmore and Chris French, is that they give it as a blanket explanation, Tony, right. And it's clear when you study the cases individually that you can't use it as a blanket explanation. If you wanted, Tony, if you want to be critical or skeptical, you may be able to find certain instances where that kind of explanation may well fit. But as a blanket explanation, doesn't fit. I'll give you one example. Although my characters are fictional, you know, there's 3 of them. So do you all have temporal lobe epilepsy, or, you know, whatever it is, a waking dream, all at the same time and all about the same thing? I don't think so. You know, it just doesn't work. Yeah. And also there's been some studies with certain cases where that's, you know, a very famous one, Whitley Strieber, you know, the author of Communion. Before Whitley published Communion, that was one of the type of thing that was put to him as a scenario for his experiences. So Whitley, you know, went to the doctors, the psychiatrists, and all of that was ruled out. So, you know, it's an interesting area of study, but I don't think it works as a blanket explanation, I'm afraid.
Do you think that the situation involving the characters in your book, for example, are they all suffering the elephant in the room of post-traumatic stress disorder from their experiences?
There is an element of that in there, yes. I mean, the way I've set the family up is that they were already under strain anyway.
Yes.
You know, it's 1990, it's a period of change. They're overworked, underpaid. They have a teenage daughter. You know, I had 2 of those myself, so I know how difficult it can be. Yeah. You know, Alan is a teacher. Although he's good at his job, he's never really fit into that job. You know, his wife, Pamela, is a social worker. You know, got too many caseloads, too much work, too much stress. So this on top of all that does cause even more aggravation and more stress, but not stress that you know that you can deal with, you know, work stress and life stress. You know, a lot of us we deal with that on a day-to-day basis, but this is something entirely different. And it's interesting you should mention post-traumatic stress. I'll give you an example why. We've mentioned Rosalind a few times. She only ever did one, as far as I know, one speaking engagement, and that was for a conference I had in Sheffield some years ago. And she did only a short presentation, and afterwards, a young lady came up to me and said, "Can I speak to you, Philip?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, of course you can." She says, "I'm actually a psychiatric nurse. You know, this is what I do for a living." And all the signs are with that lady, if you don't mind me saying, is that she's suffering from post-traumatic stress. So,
why is it?
Yeah,
so, sorry, Phil, the line's gone spoiled. Can you hear me? I was just saying, why I was sat next to Chris French on this morning, and he's a psychologist, but he didn't notice perhaps that I might have been suffering post-traumatic stress disorder. Is it something they're conveniently not looking for, or is it something that they tend to avoid, that they don't want to really discuss?
I think it's a bit of both, Tony, right. if I'm honest. Yeah. I mean, you know, professional skeptics, as I call them, don't always impress me a great deal. I mean, probably the biggest skeptic, again, he's no longer with us, was Philip Class. And I said, you know, Philip, without this subject, nobody would have heard of you, mate.
Yes.
So, you know, you've become well known because of this subject. And he didn't like that. Right. But even if you were to take the scenarios of Dr. Blackmore and Chris French, there is some kind of psychological experience, then for me, that would still be a fascinating area of study. And why aren't they studying it? You know, but you also have to understand, Tony, you know, people keep hold of their faculties. Let's assume Chris French is right. They keep all their faculties about them.
Yes.
Tom, was what I was going to say.
Yeah.
They don't lose control in any way.
Yes.
But surely if we're having some kind of, you know, mental episode,
yes,
then somebody would have seen, let's say your experience or one of your experiences took place while you were driving your car. Maybe they'd see you sat at the side of the road, you know, gazing out of the windscreen, you know, with a blank look on your face. I've never heard of anyone who's crashed their car and said, "Oh, I was having this strange dream about being abducted by aliens." You know, I don't think they're on the right track, if I'm totally honest, Tony.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they are either. But what is interesting, Phil, is throughout the all the researchers I've spoken to, I know Richard Hall did something about it was the triangle. I think it was up in Lincolnshire, the Lincolnshire cattle mutilation triangle. What was surprising before we went to air was the fact that you're not. Is that the term? You do not believe in the cattle mutilation thing, and I found that fascinating. I wonder if you could tell the listeners more on your take on that.
Yeah, well, cattle mutilations came to the fore back in, I think it was the late 1970s with Linda Moulton Howe in the States. Linda was a documentary maker, former beauty queen in her youth, and that's how it sort of came into sort of public recognition. But you know, to me, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, Tony. I have to be honest. I also read a book called Mute Evidence some years back, and it gave, you know, explanations for most, if not all, of the cattle mutilations, the lack of blood, you know, yeah, absolutely.
What was that called, Phil? Mute Evidence?
It's called Mute Evidence. I can't remember the authors now. It's quite an extensive book.
Yeah.
And it's not a skeptical book. These isn't Philip Class. They looked into it and you know, they reckon they could find the answers for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
For example, like the lack of blood, I apologise if my terminology is not correct. I'm not a vet, but, you know, sometimes when the animals are attacked, it's a natural, reaction of the body to feed the blood to the inner organs because they are the most protected, you know, the heart, the lungs and whatever. So the external tissue doesn't secrete a lot of blood and things like that, you know, and they talk about predators and cults and all kinds of things. So it's not an area I've studied a great deal, to be honest, Tony, but, you know, it's not one that you know, I have a lot of time for, if I'm perfectly honest.
Yeah, okay. But also I mean, you indicated earlier that you work for, can we say on air what you do, that you, anyway, you work for a living, let's put it this way. You've got another job, haven't you?
I work for a living for one of the major banks.
Yes. And with that sprung up issues regarding the Illuminati and all that kind of thing. So, and the fact that you, in your all the years of research, when somebody mentions the Illuminati, you actually aren't a big believer in that, nor do you perceive them to be there. Just tell us more from your perspective, Phil, about that. Why you don't believe in them, in the Illuminati and the secret society thing that goes on behind the scenes.
there are secret societies, but just because something's secret, it doesn't mean an awful lot. But I met probably one of the biggest conspiracy writers, a chap called Jim Mars, out in the States. Yep. Jim's book, Crossfire, The Plot to Kill Kennedy, was the basis for the film JFK. Yeah. And he's a great raconteur, a great laugh, but he asked me what I did for a living. I kept a straight face. Yeah. And I said, I work for the Illuminati. And, and there was a pause and it was silent. I said, I work for a bank, and, which is true. And, I dinner with Jim and a few others, and I listened to his presentation, and for me, it was just, there's a conspiracy around every corner. There was conspiracies about conspiracies.
Yes.
There are cover-ups. Don't get me wrong about various things. It is the nature of government to keep secrets. But, just because they keep secrets, it doesn't necessarily mean it's anything, untoward. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine used to work in a textile mill, and he had to sign the Official Secrets Act. And the reason he did that is because they made cloth for military uniforms.
Yes, yes. I've had to do that myself, Phil, in the course of things, because of that. The line keeps dropping out. Are you still with us? Back, Phil. I don't know what's happening here, but the line keeps dropping in and out on us.
I know what it is, Tony. It's the Illuminati.
It'll be the Illuminati, won't it? But I'll edit it. I wanted to cover also, Phil, your other books as well, which one that intrigues me is Without Consent. Your other book that you did, Without Consent.
Yes, that was the first book I ever did back in 1994 with a colleague of mine called Carl Negatis. Yeah. Carl was a former Fleet Street journalist. Yeah. Had a glittering career in Fleet Street, and he finished. I actually got to know him when he was working on a number of newspapers, and we did a few bits together. So he left and he set up on his own, and the premise of the book was actually, to begin with, a documentary. We were commissioned to write a documentary for a company, and at the end they backed out. So I said, it'd be nice to put this into a book format. And I literally, travelled the length and breadth of Britain, speaking to people who had experiences of missing time, abduction. Got some, some historical accounts, files and things from other researchers. And, Carl was initially, the skeptical journalist. But I think after he'd interviewed a few people, it kind of changed his mind somewhat. Yeah. These weren't the tabloid fodder that he'd previously thought they were. Yes. Especially because there was a few near to where he lived at the time as well. So he could go and speak to them whenever he pretty much felt like, they were, and, it's a book I'm very proud of, Tony. It's, as far as I'm aware, I haven't read every book that's gone out. It's still the only one that deals with this type of encounter from a British point of view. Right. All the cases in it are here from Britain, nowhere else. Right. There's some well-known incidents in it, like, Police Constable Alan Godfrey, is well known, but there were lots that had never been heard of before. And I think it was a dawn of a change in things at that time, Tony. Not long after that, you people like John Mack hit the headlines, and Nick Polk at the MOD. And I think whether you agree with what they say or not, I think they gave the subject that little bit of credibility, if you like. Yeah. And we wrote the book in an easygoing style, if that's the right phrase. Yeah. Again, to paint the abductees in the right light. And I know a lot of them that were featured in the book. I sent them all a copy. They were very happy with that. They were very pleased. And it's a book I look back on with a lot of pride. And believe it or not, the late Dr. Mack, although his book Abduction went on to be a worldwide bestseller, he said he wished he'd written his book in the same style. And that's from a Pulitzer Prize winning author. That's excellent, isn't it? I take that as the biggest compliment. Yeah,
well indeed, because you wrote another one as well called Awakening. How extraterrestrial contact. Well, you didn't write that. It was Mary Rodwell, wasn't it, who wrote that? But it was your publishing company that helped to write that, wasn't it?
It was. We did a paperback version of Without Consent a few years later. Yeah. Added some extra material. And Mary's done some cracking stuff. She is a Brit, but she lives in Australia. I think she lives near Perth. And I worked for a small publisher for about a year. and they released Without Consent in paperback and Mary's Awakening at the same time. And you know, I'm still in contact with Mary, and you know, she's still doing the same research.
Yeah, well, and I know one of my favourites, which I highly recommend to the listeners, is Mysterious Sky, which I've actually got with me now, which is your book with Philip Mantle and, Philip Mantle and Paul Stonehill, isn't it? And that is an interesting book as far as I'm concerned regarding the Russian, Soviet UFO phenomena. And really, I think, I don't know what you think, Phil, but did you get a cross-reference there that the British abductees were similar to the Russian ones? There was no difference, between the two?
Yeah, I think, you know, abductees are pretty, you know, similar around the world. There are cultural differences, the way we actually talk about things and the language we use, and also the emotions. You know, some groups of people are more emotional than others, you know, but, you know, in general, there isn't a lot of difference, Tony. The way the Russian material came about, I think it was about 1987.
Right.
I was actually contacted by a Russian newspaper called Izvestia. It's a big newspaper. And there'd been a UFO landing at Voronezh in the Soviet Union as it was at that time. And that was officially released by TASS, you know, the Soviet news agency. So the Russian newspaper, you know, rang me up and asked me about it. I told them what I knew and I gave them a few comments, and they even sent me a copy of it. I couldn't read a word of it. But lo and behold, out of the blue, letters from Russia started appearing on my doorstep. Most of it in Russian. You know, and I knew Paul. You know, Paul is originally from the Ukraine, but lives in the United States. So I asked Paul if he could translate some of these letters, and there were just the ordinary people reporting their sightings to us and so on. That's how it all started. I mean, you know, literally from a newspaper article in one of the national newspapers in Russia. And you know, Paul had got a lot of material. I ended up with a lot of material, so we combined our resources. Mysterious Sky was the first one. We've done another book recently called Dalmagorsk, you know, Russia's Roswell, about a crash in the Soviet Union. And we're working on a follow-up to that as we speak.
Oh, are you really? What's that then, Phil?
Well, you know, we're looking at, rather than UFOs, we're looking at USOs, unidentified submersible objects.
Yes.
And, you know, we found again that, you know, since, you know, the fall of the Soviet regime and the advent of the internet, more and more people have come forward. We have access to more information. And, that's the thrust of the next book. You know, we're working on that.
That's absolutely fascinating. Tell me something. There's an issue in Russia. Could you just clarify for me? There's Colonel Corso with his transistor and Roswell, but, am I correct in saying there was a similar scenario in Russia where they took away a UFO and developed technology from it?
Well, I mean, it's been alleged as that. The thing about Russia, again, you know, after the fall of the Soviet Empire, and you know, you could get anything out of Russia, Tony, and a lot of it wasn't necessarily a genuine article.
Right.
And there were, and still are, a number of people trying to sell you fakes.
Right.
Of all kinds of things. And I mean, me and Paul have been offered, alleged official UFO documents from certain sources in Russia for sale. You know, the so-called smoking gun. But they're not real, Tony. It's you know, that are fake. So sometimes you have to be careful with some of the sources that are there. I mean, I think you can buy I think even now you can buy an old Soviet submarine if you files, and they were all a complete and utter nonsense. They really were absolute sham.
What we were talking about was you were getting offers for documents, for Russian UFO documents, and some of them were fraud. And I think you were just saying before the line went that we were regarding the KGB UFO files as being absolutely absurd. Was that correct? Absolutely.
I mean, they were hosted by Roger Moore, ex-James Bond, and I think they did two documentaries that went around the world.
Yeah.
Purporting to show a whole host of things: a crashed flying saucer, aliens, MiG jets being shadowed by flying saucers. But there was even a newspaper article about the crashed flying saucer. And just by coincidence, the village or the town where this incident was supposed to have taken place, Paul and I had a colleague there who was a teacher in that village.
Yeah.
And, he went and searched through all the local newspaper archives there. No such newspaper cutting ever existed. So, hence we were on track, and, we knew from that very beginning.
This is all about you. And the thing is UFO Today is gonna, as you have pointed out, in watching what you're doing, Skeptics had thought that UFOs were dead, but I think UFO Today will show them just how wrong they were, I think. It covers the latest in UFO views and reviews, and I think it's going to be excellent. You've got some excellent contributors there, and discussion and debate from all sides of it, all sides of the UFO argument. So I know that you had did you have a falling out with a previous publisher that did a magazine, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I edited UFO Matrix magazine for just over a year. Yeah. And that was a newsstand publication. Yeah. I'm proud of the magazine. I think it was a good quality publication. Yeah. I'm grateful for the experience of working on it. But it just wasn't to be. We came to a parting of the waves, and things got a bit sour. And I wished them all the best, and I moved on, Tony. Got this, life's too short to be arguing with these people, and I've got better things to do, and and I'm just getting on with it.
Yeah, well, this is what you need to. I think this is what you need to do. You did also another book called Alien Autopsy, which is a fascinating. If I'm right, there's quite a story behind that, Phil. Is that correct? Just tell the listeners about your experience with Alien Autopsy.
Well, it's a question of where to start, Tony. I mean, back in 1993, I was Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association, and we had a letter from a chap called Ray Santilli. One of many letters, and he had his own company. It was called the Merlin Group, and he just wrote to us and asked, if we'd be interested in assisting with a documentary. So I rang him up. We exchanged pleasantries, gave him a bit of information. A few phone calls later, he said, "Well, actually, Philip, I have film of the UFO crash at Roswell, and the aliens being dissected. Okay, you've got my attention. Show me the film." So this was 1993, and the scenario went: yes, I can show it. No, I can't. Yes, I can. No, I can't. I met him once in London, near his offices is where we used to have some meetings, and he told me this story about buying it from a mysterious cameraman. So in 1995, so we're a year and a half further on now, I received a videotape in the post of a movie called Roswell. It was only a small release here, made by Paul Davids, and I've been sent it for review, nothing else. And I thought, I wonder if that guy Santilli still claims to have this film. Picked his card out. I've got a business card from him. I phoned him, and he says, "Well, yeah, I do, Philip, but you don't believe me." I said, "Well, I can't believe you until I see it." So he said, "Okay, make an appointment and come on down." So I went down. I think it was around about, April of 1995, somewhere around there. I sat in his office, and he showed me the film, and the rest, as they say, is history. I asked him if he'd show it at our conference later that year, which I was already organising. To my amazement, he said yes, on the proviso that I help him research it. And, off we went. It became one of the biggest stories probably in ufology, certainly, ever. It's hugely controversial. Cutting a very long story short, as the years progressed, little bits of inconsistencies crept in. I found out certain information from a number of people, all culminated in 2007 when I met a chap called Spiros Malaris. Spiros' family originally from Cyprus, and he was the man who led the team that faked it. He met Santilli by chance, and Santilli had a bit of film, but it was a fake. And Spiros said, "Well, I can make you some good stuff. I can recreate this for you." So he went away with his friend, a chap called John Humphreys, who was a sculptor, and they made the Alien Autopsy film that has been shown around the world. And, Santilli has taken in a lot of money as a result. I'm talking 7 figures, Tony. You're talking millions of dollars around the world. And he's changed his story a number of times. So, eventually I put it all in one book. It's called the Roswell Alien Autopsy. Some of your listeners may be aware that, you know, Anton Deck starred in a movie version of it. There's no relation to anything that ever happened, I can assure you.
Have you been ripped off, Phil? Have you been ripped off then in the area of all this?
I don't think it was ripped off. I think we were all ripped off as far as the truth was concerned.
Right.
You know, it cost me a few quid.
Yeah.
You know, trekking up and down to London and taking time off work. There were those at the time, Tony, who called me Ray Santilli's accomplice.
Right. Really? Bloody hell.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'll give you one of the reasons why at the time my wife and I were having a fairly extensive addition to our house. You know, a big extension.
Right.
I thought, where does Philip Mantle get all his money from?
Huh.
He doesn't have this kind of money. Well, they were right. I didn't, but my wife did.
Right. Right.
But they never thought to ask. They put two and two together and made, you know, 26.
Yeah.
They also saw the fact that I was being invited to go on television and you know, do this and lecture here and lecture there. They were very envious, Tony.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, the knives were out. But most of them, if not all of those critics, have fallen by the wayside. And of course, I wasn't Santilli's accomplice. My aim, if you like, Tony, was to get the film out into the public domain. And that way I was convinced we'd learn more about it. You know, if it was genuine, for example, someone might say, that was my grandfather, my dad, you know, whatever. If it was a fake, I hoped someone would come forward and say, well, I'm one of the actors in it, or I sold them the props, or that was my studio it was filmed in. Neither of those happened for an awful long time. It took a lot of years before the cracks finally started to appear. I went down many blind alleys. I spent 14 years working on it, Tony. 14 years.
14 years, did you?
14, yeah.
God.
And you know, I did all kinds of stuff about it. I didn't tell Santilli that I'd found these cracks. I kept that to myself and one or two close colleagues. And we chipped away and eventually we got all the details. And the real story behind it, the story of the hoax, the fake, it, for me, is at least, if not more interesting than Santilli's fictitious story. It's amusing, it's sad, there's a bit of everything in it. You know, I've just stuck to the facts in the book. I haven't gone into any of that. But what is interesting as well, I've just linked up with a screenwriter in America. And we're actually writing our own screenplay about, you know, my involvement in trying to track this thing down. And the personal side of things, you know, again, we talked about, you know, how you said, how do you manage all this? Well, I'll give you an example. When the first newspaper ran a story about the alien autopsy, they couldn't find Ray Santilli, but they could find me. My phone never stopped ringing for weeks, constantly. The fax machine would go berserk. And I remember one guy ringing me from America. He says, Philip, I've been trying to get through to you for 3 days. Can you not have another telephone line installed? I said, well, yeah, I can, but there's only me here to answer it. It doesn't matter how many telephones I've got. I can only speak to one person at a time.
Do you get calls from real weirdos then, Phil, in the course of your research? Have you had odd callers?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I've met a few as well. Not just callers, Tony. Let's be honest. Thankfully, that you know, I've never been in a situation that I couldn't handle.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, but I've met weirdos in a pub having a drink, Tony.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I'll give you one example. A gentleman from the other side of the Pennines, let's put it that way, Lancashire, contacted me, and he said, I've taken these photographs over the moors, and he said, I'd like you to come and have a look. And I thought, well, it's only about an hour's drive, if that, you know, and I'll go and have a look. So I met him in a local pub. He seemed a quite rational gentleman, you know, smartly dressed. He took the photographs out, and he lived in an apartment, you know, in a flat, high-rise flat. And you could see Saddleworth Moor in the distance, more famous for the Moors murders, of course.
Yeah.
And the light that he's talking about was actually the flash off his camera reflecting off the window.
Oh, God, bloody sake. Well, you see, that's a popular misconception with people, isn't it? It's, you know, this happens with people, because and orbs as well, when a lot of that is lens flare, isn't it, with the orb stuff. Happens quite a lot, and people get it wrong, hopelessly wrong. And we've got to remember that nearly 80 to 90% of UFOs are indeed not necessarily aliens, are they? They are phenomena. They are aircraft, planets, satellites, all that kind of thing, aren't they?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, there's been some amusing episodes like that down the years, and it's just part and parcel of the business, Tony, and you know, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, no, it certainly, and can you direct, Phil, people where they would go to this Once Upon a Missing Time book? What website do they need to go to?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy. It's just available. Go to Amazon, Tony. Is the easiest way to look for it. You know, just go to Amazon, put my name in, or you can put the title of the book in. You can find it in paperback, or it's on Kindle as well, so you can download it.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, there's no postage costs in Kindle. You can download it from anywhere in the world. It's as simple as that.
Yes. Yeah. No, it does. It looks absolutely excellent, Phil. It really does. And I'll certainly hope that you'll certainly use this interview, because it's been a fascinating chatting to you. It certainly has. And there's been some excellent reviews. Just one review from Brian Allen, who is an author who I know of. He's a classic example of poacher turned gamekeeper. Philip Mantle has dug deep into his long-established background as a world-renowned investigator of the UFO phenomena to produce a first-class novel based on his years of experience in the field. And I've got to say, Phil, it's left me wanting more with the material that you've sent me. So I thank you very much for appearing on the Tony Topping Show. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Philip Mantle. Thanks a lot, Phil.
My pleasure, Tony. Anytime, mate. And good luck with this, and good luck with your film crew thing.
Oh,